They found the match that would save my twins from leukemia. Then the doctor said his name, and I realized my children's only hope was the billionaire who'd already abandoned them once. He looked at Helen and David, his own son and daughter, and said the words I'll never forget. I can't afford the risk to my schedule. My 12-year-olds heard their father choose a board meeting over their lives, but he didn't know what a mother becomes when someone tries to take her children. And what happened next would cost him everything he thought mattered. There are moments in life that split everything into before and after. For me, it was 9:47 on a Thursday morning, in a hospital room that smelled like bleach and fear, when Dr. Morrison said the words I'd been praying for, and the name I'd spent 13 years bearing. Helen was asleep when he walked in. Finally, blessedly, her small chest rising and falling in that shallow way that made my own breath catch every single time. David sat upright in the chair beside her bed, pretending to read a book he'd been staring at for an hour, trying to be brave, trying to be strong. 12 years old, both of them. Too young to know what dying feels like, too old to be protected from it, because leukemia doesn't care about childhood. It doesn't pause for birthday parties or school projects or the quiet moments when a mother whispers, promises she's terrified she can't keep. It just takes and keeps taking until there's nothing left. And it was taking both of my children. Twins, same blood, same diagnosis, same ticking clock. I had been living in that hospital room for 93 days. There was a coffee stain on my jeans from last week, or maybe last month. Time had stopped meaning anything except the space between one treatment and the next, between one scan and the next prayer that maybe this time the news would be different. It never was, until that Thursday morning. Dr. Morrison gestured me into the hallway. I knew this dance. 6 months of pediatric oncology teaches you to read a doctor's face the way you used to read bedtime stories. And his expression that morning was different. Not the careful neutrality before bad news. Not the braced expression before another setback. This was something else. Something that looked almost like hope. If you've ever watched someone you love fight for their life, if you've ever sat in a hospital room counting breaths and praying for miracles, you know what I'm talking about. And if this story feels familiar, if you've been where I've been or you're there right now, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button, because what happens next is something every mother needs to hear, and I don't want you to miss a single word. I followed Dr. Morrison into the small consultation room, the one with the tissue box that was always full, the one with the window overlooking the parking lot where parents sat in their cars and screamed where their children couldn't hear them. I'd been in that room 11 times. We found a match, he said. The words hung in the air like something fragile, something I was afraid to touch in case it shattered. A bone marrow match, he continued, watching my face, compatible for both Helen and David. The room spun. My hands shot out and gripped the edge of the table because my knees actually buckled. Compatible for both. Do you understand what that means? The odds of finding one viable bone marrow match are already brutal, 1 in 430 people for most patients. But finding a single donor compatible with 2 patients? Dr. Morrison had called it a statistical anomaly, a miracle wrapped in science, and now he was telling me that miracle had a name. When can we proceed? I asked. My voice didn't sound like mine. It sounded like someone who was afraid to hope and too desperate not to. That's when he hesitated, and that hesitation cracked everything wide open. There's something you need to know first, Dr. Morrison said carefully. The match. It's Walter Scott. Time stopped. Not slowed, stopped. Walter Scott. Billionaire CEO. Forbes covers. That face on every business magazine for the past 5 years. The man whose company had gone public and shattered records. The man whose net worth had 9 zeros. The man who'd walked out of my apartment 13 years ago, written a check, and disappeared. The man who didn't know he had twins. Or maybe, and this was the part that made my stomach turn, maybe he did know and just never cared enough to ask. That's not possible, I whispered. But even as I said it, I knew it was. Of course it was. He was their father, their biological match, the one person whose DNA carried the exact markers, the exact compatibility needed to save them. The one person who'd made it brutally clear he wanted nothing to do with the children I was carrying. "We've initiated contact with his office," Dr. Morrison said, his voice gentle in that way doctors use when they know they're delivering hope wrapped in barbed wire. "The transplant coordinator reached out this morning. Given the urgency and the medical ethics involved, we're required to inform potential donors and request consent." Consent. That word settled in my chest like a stone. "What if he says no?" I asked. "And here's the thing nobody tells you about medical emergencies involving children. Here's the part they don't prepare you for. You can't force someone to save your child, even if that someone is biologically responsible, even if that someone has the power to help and chooses not to. The law doesn't compel donors, not even for minors, not even for their own flesh and blood. The ethics board can witness, they can document, but they can't force a man to save his own children. If you're sitting there thinking that can't be right, that there has to be some protection, some legal recourse, leave a comment. Because what I learned that day changed everything I thought I knew about justice. Dr. Morrison's silence was the answer. I walked back to the hospital room on legs that didn't feel connected to my body. Helen was awake now, watching me with those huge knowing eyes. "Mom," she said softly, "did something happen?" I crossed to her bedside, smoothed the hair back from her forehead. Her skin was too warm. The fever was already creeping back. I could feel it under my palm, that heat that meant her body was losing another battle. "They found a match, sweetheart," I said, keeping my voice steady even though everything inside me was screaming. David's head snapped up from his book. "Really?" The hope in his voice almost broke me. "Really," I said. What I didn't say, the match is your father, the man who walked away before you took your first breath, the man who chose his company over your existence, the man who might choose it again. Because how do you tell your dying children that their only chance at survival has a name they've never heard and a history that could destroy them? But here's what I need you to understand. Here's the part that matters. When you're a mother and your children are slipping away and someone holds the power to save them, you don't get to be proud. You don't get to nurse old wounds. You don't get to hold grudges. You get to fight. And I was about to go to war, but I had no idea what was coming. I had no idea that the man who'd abandoned us once was about to do something so much worse than silence. If you think you know where this is going, you don't. Trust me. Now I want you to think about something. Think about the people in your life who showed up when it mattered. The ones who didn't have to help but did anyway. The ones who proved that family isn't always blood. Sometimes it's choice. If this story is reminding you of someone like that, share this video with them. Let them know they matter. Because what I'm about to tell you next is about the difference between people who give and people who take. Let me take you back. Because to understand what happened next, you need to understand where this story really began. 13 years earlier. I was 26 when I met Walter Scott. He wasn't a billionaire then. He was just a man with a startup, a dream, and the kind of confidence that made you believe he could actually pull it off. We met at a networking event I'd only attended because my friend dragged me there. He was in the corner nursing a drink, looking exhausted and electric at the same time. "You look like you haven't slept in a week," I said, because subtlety was never my strength. "Try to," he said, and then he smiled. That devastating, real smile that made everything in the room fade except him. We talked for 3 hours. He told me about his company, medical technology, software that could revolutionize patient data systems. He talked with his whole body, hands gesturing, eyes bright with something that felt like purpose. I told him about my work at the nonprofit, about wanting to make a difference even if it meant living on ramen and hope. We were both building something, both hungry, both naive enough to think passion could sustain you. The relationship moved fast. Too fast, probably. But when you're 26 and someone looks at you like you're the most interesting person in the room, you don't stop to question velocity. 6 months in, I loved him. 8 months in, I moved into his apartment, a cramped one-bedroom where he'd set up a desk in the closet because the living room was too distracting. 10 months in, everything changed. I took the test on a Tuesday morning. 2 lines, clear and undeniable. My hands shook so hard I had to set it down on the bathroom counter and just stare at it. Pregnant. I wasn't ready. We weren't ready. But there was something underneath the fear, something that felt almost like joy. We could do this. Together. We'd figure it out. That's what I told myself as I waited for Walter to come home that night. He walked in at 11 p.m., exhausted, carrying his laptop bag and a coffee that had gone cold hours ago. "I need to tell you something," I said. He looked up, saw my face, set the bag down slowly. "Okay, I'm pregnant." The silence that followed was the longest 10 seconds of my life. "Are you sure?" His voice was flat, careful. "I took 3 tests. Yes." He sat down hard on the couch, ran his hands through his hair, said nothing. "Walter," I said quietly, "say something." He stopped, started again. "This isn't the right time, Melissa. Not congratulations. Not we'll figure it out. Just, this isn't the right time." "I know it's not ideal," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "but we can make this work. My company is about to explode," he interrupted. "We're in the middle of our Series B funding. I'm working 18-hour days. I can't." He stopped, looked at me with something that might have been regret or might have been resentment. "I can't be tied down right now." Tied down, like I was a burden, like our child was an obstacle instead of a life. "It's not one baby," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. His head snapped up. "What?" "The ultrasound. There are 2 heartbeats. We're having twins." I watched something shut down behind his eyes, some door slamming closed. "I can't do this," he said, standing up, already reaching for his jacket, already leaving. "I'm sorry, I can't." "Walter, wait." But he was already gone. 2 days later, money appeared in my account, enough to handle it, as his lawyer's email coldly phrased it, as if my children were a problem that could be solved with a wire transfer. I never touched that money, and I never heard from him again. If you've ever been abandoned by someone you loved, if you've ever had to build a life from the rubble of someone else's choice to walk away, you understand what came next. The shame, the anger, the middle of the night panic attacks, wondering how you're going to do this alone. And if you've survived it, if you're on the other side now, I want you to do something. Leave a comment and tell me you made it, because someone reading this right now needs to know it's possible. I gave birth to Helen and David on a cold February morning. No partner in the delivery room, no hand to hold. Just me and 2 nurses who were kinder than they had to be. When they placed my babies in my arms, tiny and perfect and mine, I made a promise. You will never feel unwanted. You will never question whether you were enough. I will love you hard enough to fill every space he left empty. And I did. For 12 years, I kept that promise. We lived in a small apartment that smelled like whatever I was burning for dinner and the lavender candles I bought from the dollar store. I worked 2 jobs, data entry during the day, bartending 3 nights a week. We ate dinner together every single night at the table I'd bought secondhand, its legs still wobbly, no matter how many times I tried to fix them. Helen learned to braid hair by practicing on her dolls and then on me, her small fingers surprisingly gentle. David collected books from library sales and read under his blanket with a flashlight after bedtime, the glow seeping out from under his door like a secret. They never asked about their father, not once. Maybe they sensed it was a wound I couldn't talk about. Maybe they just knew, the way children know things, that we were complete exactly as we were. I thought I'd protected them from him. I thought the distance I'd built was enough. But you can't protect your children from biology. And when Helen came home from school one day, complaining of being tired, really tired, Mom, like I can't keep my eyes open, I didn't think anything of it at first. Growing pains, a virus, something normal, until it wasn't. The bruising started 2 weeks later, dark purple marks on her arms that appeared without explanation, blooming overnight like something rotten growing under her skin. Then David developed them too, same pattern, same severity. I took them to the pediatrician, then a specialist, then another specialist. The word leukemia was spoken in a quiet office with educational posters on the wall about hand washing and healthy eating, as if those things could prevent what was happening to my children. Acute lymphoblastic leukemia, both of them, diagnosed within 2 days of each other. The oncologist explained the treatment plan, chemotherapy, radiation, clinical trials if needed, but I barely heard him over the roaring in my ears. This isn't happening. This can't be happening. But it was. And here's where it gets important. Pay attention, because 6 months into treatment, when the chemotherapy stopped working as well, when the doctors started using words like aggressive and resistant, that's when they brought up bone marrow transplant. It's our best option, Dr. Morrison had said gently, but we need to find a match. We tested everyone, friends, co-workers, volunteers from the community who showed up because they'd seen our story in the local paper. 400 people tested, not one match. And with every failed test, I felt the window closing, felt time running out like sand through my fingers. That's when Dr. Morrison said the words that made my blood run cold. We should test the biological father. I'd shaken my head. He's not in the picture. Melissa, he'd said with the kind of gentle firmness doctors use when they're telling you there's no other choice. He's the most likely match. Genetically, he's the best chance they have. And now, standing in that hallway with my children's lives hanging in the balance, that chance had a name. Walter Scott. If you're still here, if you're still with me, do me one more thing before we go further. Hit that like button. Not for me, for every mother who's ever had to swallow her pride and face the person who broke her. Because what happens next, it tests everything I thought I knew about strength. Dr. Morrison's phone rang while I stood there, frozen in the hallway outside my children's room. He glanced at the screen. It's the transplant coordinator. My heart stopped. He answered, listened. His expression shifted, something I couldn't read. Understood, he said quietly. Yes, I'll inform her. Thank you. He ended the call and looked at me with something that might have been pity. He's agreed to come in for preliminary testing, Dr. Morrison said. Relief flooded through me so fast I almost sobbed. He's coming. He's actually coming. But, Dr. Morrison continued, and that single word erased everything. He wants to meet with you first, before any procedures. He's requested a private consultation. The relief curdled into something else. When? I asked. Tomorrow, 2 p.m. 24 hours. In 24 hours, I would see Walter Scott again. The man who'd walked away, the man who'd chosen his empire over our children, the man who now held their lives in his hands. And I had absolutely no idea what I was going to say to him. But what I did know, what I understood with absolute certainty, was that he was going to see them. He was going to look at Helen's face and David's eyes and understand exactly what he'd thrown away. And then he was going to save them. He had to, because the alternative was unthinkable. I walked back into the hospital room. Helen was awake now, watching me with those knowing eyes that seemed too old for her face. The match is coming tomorrow, I said, keeping my voice steady even though my hands were shaking. Do we know them? David asked. I hesitated. 1 second too long. You'll meet him tomorrow, I said. Him. The word hung in the air. David's eyes narrowed. Helen went very still. They weren't stupid. They'd heard that pause, that careful choice of pronoun. But they didn't ask. And I didn't explain. Because how do you tell your dying children that the father who abandoned them before they were born is suddenly their only hope? How do you prepare them for the possibility that he might look at them and walk away again? You don't. You just hold them and hope that tomorrow brings a miracle instead of another heartbreak. If you've ever had to protect your children from the truth because the truth was too brutal to speak out loud, you know what that night felt like. And if you're wondering what happened when Walter Scott finally walked through that door, when he finally came face to face with the children he'd denied, then you need to hear what comes next. Hit that subscribe button right now, because Chapter 2 is where everything I thought would happen didn't. And what did happen was so much worse than I ever imagined. That night, I didn't sleep. How could I? Tomorrow, Walter Scott would walk through that hospital door. Tomorrow, he would see the children he'd abandoned. Tomorrow, everything I'd built over 13 years, the carefully constructed life, the protective walls, the story I'd told myself about being enough, would come crashing down. I sat in the dark beside Helen's bed, listening to the rhythm of her breathing, each inhale precious, each exhale a small victory. The machines beeped in their endless pattern, a sound I'd learned to hate and need in equal measure. David had finally fallen asleep around midnight, his hand still clutching the book he'd been pretending to read, his knuckles white even in sleep. My children. Mine. Not his. Never his. Except now they needed him. And that reality felt like swallowing glass. The nurse did her rounds at 2 a.m., checked vitals, adjusted Helen's IV with practiced efficiency, gave me that sympathetic smile that hospital staff perfect. The one that says, I see you, I'm sorry, but there's nothing I can do to make this easier. You should try to rest, she whispered, her voice carrying the weight of knowing I wouldn't. I nodded. We both knew it was a lie, because every time I closed my eyes, I saw him, Walter Scott, in that cramped apartment we'd shared. Walter at 2 a.m. hunched over his laptop, empty coffee cups scattered like casualties of his ambition. Walter with that electric energy that made you believe he could actually change the world, and made you foolish enough to think you'd be part of that world. Just 6 more months, he'd say, pulling me close, pressing his forehead against mine, his breath smelling like coffee and exhaustion. 6 more months and the funding comes through. Then we can breathe. Then we can plan. Always 6 more months. Always one more deal. Always after. I'd believed him because I was 26 and in love and stupid enough to think that love could compete with ambition. It couldn't. I learned that the night I told him I was pregnant. I can still see his face when I said it. The way the color drained like someone had pulled a plug. The way his jaw went tight, muscles working beneath the skin. The way he looked at me like I just detonated a bomb in the center of his carefully constructed life. This isn't the right time, Melissa. Not congratulations. Not we'll figure it out. Not I love you and we'll make this work. Just, this isn't the right time. As if there would ever be a right time for Walter Scott to be anything other than Walter Scott. Empire builder, CEO in the making, man who couldn't be tied down. It's not one baby, I'd whispered, my hands shaking so hard I had to grip the edge of the kitchen counter. It's 2. That was the moment he stood up, reached for his jacket, the expensive one, the one he wore to investor meetings, looked at me with something that might have been regret or might have been resentment. I've never been sure which, and maybe it doesn't matter. I can't do this, he said. 3 words that changed everything. And then he left. I sat on that couch for 3 hours, waiting for him to come back, waiting for him to realize what he was walking away from, waiting for the door to open and for him to tell me he was sorry. He panicked. We'd figure it out together. The door never opened. 2 days later, money appeared in my bank account. $60,000. A lawyer's email followed with carefully worded language about resolution and mutual understanding, and no further contact. Like my children were a problem that could be solved with a wire transfer and a legal document. I never touched that money. I opened a separate account, deposited every cent, and told myself that one day, when Helen and David asked about their father, I'd show them exactly what he thought they were worth. $60,000. That was the price Walter Scott placed on 2 human lives. If you've ever been reduced to a transaction, if you've ever had someone try to pay you to disappear, you understand the special kind of rage that lives in your chest forever after. It doesn't go away. It just waits. And right now, sitting in this hospital room with machines counting my children's heartbeats, it was waking up. The pregnancy was brutal. Twins are hard on a body under the best circumstances. Twins when you're working 2 jobs, living on ramen and fear, crying in bathroom stalls during your breaks. That's not pregnancy. That's survival. I was sick constantly, lost weight instead of gaining it, my body eating itself to feed the 2 lives growing inside me. Developed preeclampsia at 32 weeks that landed me on bed rest I couldn't afford. Bed rest that meant no paychecks, no insurance, no safety net. My friend Carrie moved in with me for the last 2 months, brought me food I couldn't keep down, helped me to the bathroom when my legs swelled so badly I couldn't walk, told me terrible jokes to keep me from spiraling into the darkness that was always waiting at the edges. You're going to be an amazing mom, she'd say, holding my hair back while I threw up for the 3rd time that morning. I wanted to believe her, but mostly I was just terrified. Labor started at 3 a.m. on a Tuesday, 36 weeks, early but not dangerously so. Carrie drove me to the hospital with my overnight bag and a playlist she'd made called Birth is Metal that was somehow both completely inappropriate and exactly what I needed. 16 hours later, Helen arrived. 4 pounds, 11 ounces, screaming like she was furious at the world for making her wait so long, her tiny fists clenched and ready to fight. 18 minutes after that, David followed. 5 pounds even. Quiet, watchful. Those serious eyes already trying to figure out the rules, already calculating how to survive. They placed both of them on my chest, tiny and warm and impossibly perfect, and I felt something slot into place in my soul. This is it. This is everything that matters. The nurse asked if I wanted to call anyone, family, friends, the father. No, I said, holding my babies closer, feeling their heartbeats against mine. It's just us. And it was. The first year was a blur of sleepless nights, endless diapers, bottles timed to the minute. I went back to work at 8 weeks because I had to. Found a daycare I could barely afford run by a woman named Rosa, who smelled like cinnamon and treated my babies like her own grandchildren. Learned to function on 4 hours of sleep and coffee that had gone cold hours ago. Walter never called, never sent a card on their birthday. Never asked how they were or if they were healthy or if they looked like him. Nothing. It was like we'd been erased from his reality, deleted like a bad business deal, written off like a failed investment. Some nights after I'd put Helen and David to bed, I'd find myself staring at my phone, wondering if I should reach out, wondering if he deserved to know that his children had started walking, started talking, started becoming actual people with personalities and preferences and tiny opinions about everything. Helen, who refused to eat anything green and had to arrange her toys in perfect lines before bed. David, who collected smooth stones from the playground and kept them in his pockets like treasures. But then I'd remember his face when I told him I was pregnant. I can't do this, and I'd put the phone down. Because here's what I learned in those years. You can't force someone to care. You can't guilt someone into loving their own children. You either show up or you don't. And Walter Scott had made his choice. So I made mine. I showed up every single day, for every fever and every nightmare, and every scraped knee and every parent-teacher conference. For Helen's first dance recital when she was so nervous, she forgot half the steps and I cheered like she'd performed at Carnegie Hall. For David's first science fair project, a volcano that exploded all over our kitchen and made us both laugh until we cried, baking soda in our hair for days. We built a life, small, modest, sometimes held together with duct tape and prayers and the kind of stubborn determination that comes from having no other choice. But it was ours. Helen learned to braid hair by watching YouTube videos at midnight when she couldn't sleep. David collected books from library sales and read under his blanket with a flashlight after bedtime, the pages worn soft from being read over and over. We had Friday movie nights with popcorn and a projector I'd bought secondhand that buzzed quietly in the dark. We had inside jokes and traditions and a love so fierce it scared me sometimes. I thought I'd protected them. I thought the distance I'd built was a wall strong enough to keep Walter Scott's absence from touching them. I was wrong, because you can't protect your children from biology, and biology doesn't care about walls or distance or 13 years of silence. Biology only cares about blood. If you're watching this and you've built a life from nothing, if you've been both mother and father and every role in between, I need you to understand something. What you did matters. It counts, and nobody can take that from you. Leave a comment and tell me you did it. Tell me you survived, because someone needs to hear it's possible. The knock on the hospital room door came at 9 a.m. I'd been awake for 31 hours straight. Dr. Morrison stepped in, tablet in hand, expression carefully neutral in that way doctors have when they're carrying news that could shatter or save. "He's here," he said quietly. My stomach dropped. Helen and David were both awake, both watching me with those two knowing eyes. "Who's here?" David asked, his voice careful, like he was afraid of the answer. I stood up, smoothed my shirt even though it was wrinkled beyond redemption, stained with coffee and tears and 93 days of not going home, tried to make my face do something that wasn't panic or rage or bone-deep exhaustion. "The donor," I said. "The match. Can we meet him?" Helen asked, her voice small, fragile as glass. I looked at Dr. Morrison. He gave a slight nod. Now or never, Melissa. Now or never. Yes, I said. You can meet him. I walked out into the hallway, and there he was. Walter Scott, 13 years older. Tailored suit that probably cost more than 3 months of my rent. Hair graying at the temples in that distinguished way that men get and women just call aging. Presence that filled the entire corridor like he owned the oxygen itself. He looked like power incarnate until he saw me. Then something flickered across his face, something almost human beneath the billionaire veneer. Melissa, he said. My name in his mouth felt like violence. Thank you for coming, I said, because what else do you say to the man who destroyed you and now holds the power to save you? He nodded, looked past me toward the hospital room door, and I saw something I didn't expect. Fear. Actual, genuine fear. Are they? They're 12, I said, cutting him off. Helen and David, twins, your children. He flinched. Actually flinched like I'd struck him. Can I? He trailed off, the great Walter Scott at a loss for words. Can you what? Meet them? See them? Acknowledge they exist? The words came out sharper than I intended, but I was so tired, so angry, so terrified of what would happen in the next 5 minutes. Walter's jaw tightened, muscles working beneath expensive cologne. I came, didn't I? 13 years too late. Silence stretched between us like a canyon. I want to see them, he said finally. I stepped aside, and Walter Scott walked toward the hospital room where his children, our children, were waiting to meet the father who'd never wanted them. What happens next will change everything we thought we understood about power, choice, and what it means to be a parent. Hit subscribe, because Chapter 3 is where Walter Scott sees his children for the first time and makes a decision that will haunt all of us. Walter Scott didn't walk into that hospital room alone. He arrived with an entourage. His attorney, a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and a briefcase that probably cost more than my monthly rent. A medical consultant he'd apparently hired overnight to review the procedure details. And his executive assistant, a young man who kept checking his phone like there were more important places to be. 3 people to insulate him from reality. 3 people to stand between a billionaire CEO and the consequences of his choices. Dr. Morrison met them in the conference room first. Hospital policy. Before any potential donor could meet the patients, there were protocols, forms, legal documentation, and in this case, because Walter had requested it, a DNA test to confirm what we already knew. I stood outside the conference room, arms crossed, watching through the glass wall as Walter signed papers, with the kind of detached efficiency he probably used to approve million-dollar contracts. This was business to him. My children's lives were just another transaction. Ms. Lewis, a lab technician approached with a tablet. We have the DNA results. Dr. Morrison asked me to show you first. I looked at the screen. 99.97% probability of paternity. Undeniable. Definitive. Scientifically irrefutable. Walter Scott was their father. I'd known it for 13 years, but seeing it written there in clinical language, reduced to percentages and genetic markers, made something twist in my chest. Show him, I said. The technician nodded and disappeared into the conference room. I watched Walter's face as he read the results. No surprise, no shock. Just a slight tightening around his eyes. A nearly imperceptible nod. The kind of micro-expression you develop when you spend years controlling boardrooms. He'd known. Of course he'd known. His attorney leaned in, whispered something with her hand covering her mouth like they were in a spy movie. Walter responded without looking at her, his voice low. Then he stood, straightened his jacket with practiced precision, and turned toward the door. Toward me. Toward the children he'd spent 13 years pretending didn't exist. They don't know who you are, I said before he could speak. They know someone matching their bone marrow came forward. That's it. Walter's jaw tightened. What did you tell them about me? Nothing, I said flatly. There was nothing to tell. You were a blank space, an absence. How do you describe nothing? Something flickered across his face, Guilt? Anger? I couldn't tell anymore. Maybe I never could. I'd like to meet them, he said. Not I want to meet my children. Not I need to see them, just the careful, neutral language of someone approaching an obligation he hadn't asked for. I wanted to scream at him, wanted to grab him by his expensive collar and make him understand what he'd thrown away. But Helen and David were 30 feet away, and they were dying. And this man, this calculating, emotionless man, was their only chance. So I swallowed the rage like poison and opened the door. Helen saw him first. She was sitting up in bed, her thin frame wrapped in the blanket I'd brought from home, the one with stars on it that she'd had since she was 6, worn soft from years of washing. Her eyes went wide when Walter walked in, because he looked like David. Same jawline, same serious expression, same way of holding himself like he was bracing for impact, shoulders squared against invisible threats. David's head snapped up from his book. He stared at Walter with an intensity that made the room feel smaller, the air thicker. For a moment, nobody moved. Walter stood frozen in the doorway, his entourage hovering behind him like satellites. He was looking at Helen and David the way you'd look at a photograph come to life, with recognition and disbelief and something that might have been wonder all tangled together. "Hi," Helen said finally, her voice small. Walter's throat worked. "Hello." The most powerful word in the English language, and he delivered it like he was reading from a script written by lawyers. I moved to Helen's bedside, one hand on her shoulder. "This is Walter Scott. He's the bone marrow match we told you about." "Walter Scott?" David's eyes widened. "Like the Walter Scott, the tech CEO?" Because of course David would know. He'd been reading business magazines since he was 10, trying to understand how the world worked, always 3 steps ahead of where 12-year-olds were supposed to be, building frameworks in his mind to make sense of chaos. Walter nodded stiffly. "Yes." "That's so cool," David said, and the genuine awe in his voice made my heart crack clean in half. "Your company's data integration system is revolutionary. I read about it in Forbes. The way you restructured patient data accessibility in hospitals could save thousands of lives annually. My son was dying, and he was fanboying over the man who'd abandoned him. If you're watching this and your heart just broke for David, for that moment when a child reaches out to someone who doesn't deserve their admiration, when innocence meets cruelty and doesn't recognize it yet, leave a comment. Tell me you see it, because what happens next is even worse." Walter cleared his throat. "Thank you. Thank you." Helen was watching him differently, quieter, more careful. She'd inherited my instincts, the ability to read people, to sense danger, to know when someone wasn't telling the whole truth. "Are you going to help us?" she asked. The question hung in the air like smoke from a fire you can't put out. Walter's attorney stepped forward, her heels clicking on the linoleum. "Mr. Scott is here to discuss the medical procedure and understand the full scope of—" "I'm asking him," Helen interrupted, her voice stronger than it had been in weeks. "Not you." 12 years old and already understanding that lawyers speak in circles while real people speak in truth. Walter held up a hand, silencing his attorney with the casual authority of someone used to being obeyed. He walked closer to Helen's bed, then David's, studied their faces like he was trying to solve an equation, calculating variables he hadn't accounted for. "The procedure," he said finally, looking at me instead of them. "What exactly does it involve?" I kept my voice steady, clinical, because if I let emotion in, I'd shatter into pieces these children couldn't afford to witness. "Bone marrow extraction. They'll harvest stem cells from your hip bone under general anesthesia. You'll be sore for a few days, maybe a week. Some bruising, fatigue, minor discomfort, but nothing permanent, nothing that will impact your life in any meaningful way. And for them? For them, it's everything. Without a transplant, they have maybe 8 to 12 weeks. With it, with your cells, they have a chance, a real chance at survival, a chance to see 13, to grow up, to live." Walter was quiet, too quiet. His medical consultant stepped forward, whispering something about recovery time and scheduling conflicts, and I felt the floor shift beneath me. My blood ran cold. Scheduling conflicts? I repeated, my voice dangerously soft. Walter's expression shifted, became careful, became the face of a man used to negotiating his way out of uncomfortable positions. I have a board vote in 6 weeks, he said quietly. Critical. The company's future depends on it. I need to understand the recovery timeline, the risks, what this could mean for my ability to what? I cut him off. To sit in a boardroom? To make more money? To build your empire while your children die? Melissa, they're dying. Walter. The words came out raw, desperate. Helen and David both flinched like I'd slapped them. Walter looked at them, really looked at them, and I saw something cross his face. Recognition, maybe? Regret. But underneath it, something else. Calculation. He was weighing options, measuring risks, doing the cost-benefit analysis he'd built his entire career on, the same cold logic that had turned a startup into a billion-dollar empire. Except this time, the cost was his children's lives. If you're feeling that rage building, that sense of injustice when someone with power chooses not to use it, hit that subscribe button, because what I do next will matter. I'm not saying no, he said carefully, every word chosen with legal precision. I'm saying I need time to consider all the factors, to consult with my doctors, to understand the full implications. The full implications? My voice was shaking. Your children are dying. That's the implication. That's the only implication that should matter. His attorney touched his arm. Mr. Scott, perhaps we should continue this conversation privately. No, I said, stepping between them. Whatever you have to say, you say it here, in front of them. They deserve to hear it. They deserve to know who you are. Walter's jaw clenched. For a moment, I thought he might actually be human, might actually feel something beneath the expensive suit and billionaire armor. Then he spoke. I need 72 hours, he said, to review everything with my medical team, to understand the procedure fully, to make an informed decision. 72 hours, 3 days. 3 days while my children's organs slowly failed. 3 days while their cells died faster than their bodies could replace them. 3 days while a billionaire CEO decided whether his own children were worth the inconvenience. Walter, I said, my voice breaking, they don't have 72 hours. Then I'll move quickly, he said. But he was already backing toward the door, already retreating into the safety of his entourage and his lawyers and his billion-dollar bubble. Helen's hand found mine. Mom, what's happening? I couldn't answer, couldn't speak past the rage and terror lodged in my throat like broken glass. Walter paused at the door, looked back at Helen and David one more time, his face unreadable. I'll be in touch, he said, and then he left, with his attorneys, with his consultant, with his assistant still checking his phone for messages more important than the children dying in front of him. Gone. The silence that followed was deafening. Mom? David's voice was small, scared. Is he going to help us? I looked at my son, at his father's eyes and his father's face, at the hope and confusion warring there, at the first dawning understanding that sometimes people don't do the right thing, even when the right thing is obvious. I don't know, baby, I whispered. But I did know. I knew that Walter Scott had just looked at his dying children and asked for time to consider whether they were worth saving, and that knowledge felt like drowning. If you think you know how this ends, you don't, because what Walter Scott does next will shock you. And what I do in response, that's where this story really begins. Subscribe, because Chapter 4 is where everything breaks. 72 hours came and went. Walter didn't call. Helen's fever climbed to 104. David stopped finishing his sentences because he was too tired halfway through. The nurses started moving slower when they walked into our room, that careful, quiet slow that meant they were bracing for what might happen next. On the 4th day, the call finally came. Ms. Lewis, the administrator said, voice too gentle. Mr. Scott has requested a formal meeting. Tomorrow at 2 p.m. The hospital ethics board will be present. Not, we're scheduling the transplant. A meeting with the ethics board. Every cell in my body knew that wasn't a good sign. The conference room was too bright. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, reflecting off the polished table. A box of tissues sat in the center, like a centerpiece for bad news. Through the glass wall, I could see the hallway where parents paced and pretended to be okay. The ethics board sat on one side. Dr. Morrison, Patricia, a hospital administrator, a bioethicist in a navy blazer, and the hospital's legal counsel. Their faces were professional, composed, heavy. I sat alone on the other side. Walter walked in right on time. New suit, same jawline, same presence. His lawyer followed. So did a donor rights consultant, as if this was some theoretical case and not my children's lives. He didn't look at me right away. He took his seat, adjusted his tie, placed his pen exactly parallel to the table's edge. Then he said, "Thank you all for meeting with me." He was addressing the room like it was a board presentation. "Not the mother of his dying kids," Patricia started. "We're here to formally document Mr. Scott's response to the request for bone marrow donation, given his genetic match to the patients, Helen and David Lewis." I held on to the edge of my chair. Walter folded his hands. "I want to be clear that I've given this considerable thought. I've consulted with multiple medical professionals. I understand the gravity of the situation." "Then say it," I said. "Say your decision." He glanced at his attorney, then back at me. "I can't proceed with the donation." The room went silent. You know that silence when bad news lands? When everyone knows something terrible has just been said, but no one breathes because they're waiting for someone to say it's a mistake. Nobody said it was a mistake. "You what?" My voice sounded wrong in my own ears. Too thin. Too far away. "You're declining?" "I can't proceed," he repeated quieter. "I'm declining to serve as a donor." Dr. Morrison leaned forward. "Mr. Scott, just so we are perfectly clear, without this transplant, Helen and David have at best 8 to 12 weeks. You are their only viable match. This is not one option among many. This is their only realistic chance." "I understand," Walter said. "Do you?" I whispered. Because I didn't think he did. Not really. Not in the way that mattered. "Explain it to me," I said, my voice shaking. "Explain why you can't spend a week recovering from a procedure that could save your children's lives." Walter inhaled slowly. "I have a critical board vote in 5 weeks. The company is at a pivotal juncture. This vote will determine our trajectory for the next decade. My presence, my health, my stability, they're all essential." He spoke the way people talk about stock prices, not souls. "The procedure carries risks," he went on. "Recovery could take days, possibly weeks. There are potential complications, anemia, infection, long-term fatigue. I can't risk—" "Your schedule?" I cut in. "You can't risk your schedule?" His attorney cleared her throat. "There is also the matter of public perception. Given Mr. Scott's position, any medical procedure could trigger speculation about his fitness to lead. We're talking about investor confidence, stock volatility, partner relationships, image," I said. "You're worried about your image." My children were dying, and this room was discussing optics. The bioethicist finally spoke. "Mr. Scott, I want to make sure you understand the ethical dimension. These are your biological children. They didn't choose to be born. They didn't choose this disease. You are uniquely positioned to help at relatively minimal risk to yourself." "I'm aware," Walter said. "So you are knowingly choosing not to provide the only treatment likely to save them," the bioethicist said quietly. Walter's jaw flexed. "I am choosing not to proceed with the donation at this time. Not I can't. I am choosing not to. If you've ever watched someone say something unforgivable in a perfectly calm voice, if you've sat across a table from a person who looks you in the eye and chooses themselves over your child, then you know that kind of rage isn't loud. It's ice cold." My hands were trembling, but my voice somehow was steady. "You abandoned them once," I said. "Isn't that enough?" He flinched. "I didn't ask for this," he muttered. "Neither did they." The door opened. At first I thought it was a nurse, someone bringing another form, another protocol. It was Helen. She stood in the doorway, hospital gown hanging off her thin shoulders, fingers wrapped around her IV pole. A nurse hovered behind her, whispering, "Honey, you shouldn't be in here." But Helen had that look she gets when she's decided something. She'd always been like that. Even as a toddler, once she set her mind on something, good luck moving her. Her eyes went straight to Walter. "You're him," she said, breathing a little harder than normal from the walk. "You're our father." No one had said that word in this room. Not yet, but she did. The bioethicist shifted. Dr. Morrison went pale. Walter looked like someone had drained the blood from his veins. "Helen, sweetheart," I started. She took another step forward. I heard you. I heard you say you won't help us." Her voice cracked on won't. "Did we do something wrong?" she asked. "Is that why you don't want to save us?" That question should not exist in any child's mouth. Walter's face crumpled. "No, no, you didn't." "Then why?" Her eyes were huge, shining with fever, and something worse, understanding. "Why won't you help us?" He opened his mouth. No words came out, because there was no explanation that wouldn't condemn him further. David appeared behind Helen, one hand on her shoulder, the other clutching the doorframe like he needed it to stand. He looked at Walter the way he'd looked at those business articles, studying, analyzing, evaluating. "It's okay, Helen," he said quietly, though his voice trembled. "We don't need him." That sentence broke something in me. My son, my 12-year-old boy, intubated days away, now telling his own father, "We don't need you." "We're leaving," I said, standing. "This meeting is over." I turned to the ethics board. "You have your documentation. You have his decision. Write down every word. You might not be able to force him to save them, but you can make sure history remembers what he chose." Then I led my children out of that room. I didn't look back, because I'd seen enough. And right there in that sterile hallway smelling of disinfectant and despair, I made myself a promise. I will never kneel to this man again. I will not beg him to be human. If he won't do what's right out of love, he will do it out of consequence. Every mother watching this knows that moment, when you realize you can't protect your children from the hurt, so you decide to confront the source of it instead. If you've ever had to be stronger than you felt in front of your kids, leave a comment. Someone needs to know they're not the only one. Behind us, Walter's chair scraped the floor, but he didn't follow. He just let us walk away. And that told me everything I needed to know. Walter left the hospital that day with his suit still pressed and his image still intact. But that was about to change. Because if he thought he could choose his boardroom over my twins in private and walk away untouched, he had no idea who he was dealing with. Subscribe, because Chapter 5 is where I stop waiting for mercy and start creating consequences. I didn't cry that night, not because there was nothing left to cry, because something inside me had snapped clean in half and reformed into something sharper. Helen slept fitfully, mumbling in her dreams. David stared at the ceiling until nearly dawn, his small hands clenched into fists, the monitors around him blinking like a city skyline at night. The man who could save them had chosen not to, so I chose something too. I chose war, not the kind with weapons, the kind with truth. The next morning I walked into Dr. Morrison's office. "I need everything on record," I said. "All of it. The DNA results, the bone marrow compatibility, the ethics board minutes, his exact words, his stated reasons." Dr. Morrison looked at me for a long moment. "Melissa," he said carefully, "what are you planning?" "Sunlight," I said. "You can call it whatever you like. Transparency, accountability. I'm done letting him make life or death choices in private." "You understand there are risks," he said, "to you, to the kids, to their privacy." "I understand there are risks to staying quiet," I replied. "They're dying. He is choosing not to help. If he wants to make that choice, fine. But he isn't going to hide behind closed doors while he does it." He exhaled. "Officially, I have to tell you we don't endorse public disclosures like this. Unofficially," he turned to his computer, "the ethics board documented everything. His refusal, his reasons, the timeline. It's not opinion, it's fact." Within an hour, I had copies of every document. That's when I met Ellis. She'd been the night nurse for weeks, quiet, efficient. The kind of nurse who tucked blankets just right and talked to the kids like they were people, not patients. She caught me in the hallway. "I heard about the meeting," she said softly. "If you go public, if someone needs to confirm that he's the only match and refused, I'll tell the truth, on the record." "You're putting your job at risk," I said. "So is everyone who looks away from this," she answered. "I'm not doing that." Later, Amanda from social work found me in the family room. "I've been doing this for 15 years, she said, sitting beside me. "I've seen broke parents do everything humanly possible to help their children. I've seen people with nothing sell their cars, their houses, their wedding rings. What I haven't seen is a man with everything refusing to sit in a hospital bed for a few days to save his kids." She handed me a card. "A friend of mine writes about medical ethics. If you're going to do this, do it with someone who will tell the story right. If you've ever had people show up when you had no leverage, no power, nothing but the truth, you know how that feels. If you've been that person for someone else, say so in the comments." That's the kind of person this story is for. I didn't go to a tabloid. I didn't spin the story. I just told it. I opened my laptop in the dim light of the family room at 3 a.m. while my children slept down the hall and typed, "My name is Melissa Lewis. I am the mother of 12-year-old twins, Helen and David, both fighting acute lymphoblastic leukemia. After 6 months of failed treatments, doctors found a bone marrow match. The match is their biological father, Walter Scott, CEO of MedTech Innovations. He has declined to donate. His stated reasons, documented by the hospital ethics board, concern for his upcoming board vote, potential impact on stock prices and investor confidence, scheduling conflicts, and personal health risk. I attach redacted medical records, names blurred except ours and his. The ethics board summary, the DNA probability statement, every piece of evidence that turned this from he said, she said, into here are the documents." Then I sent it to 3 people, the medical ethics journalist Amanda recommended, a healthcare policy blogger, and a local news reporter who'd covered our community bone marrow drive months earlier. I didn't ask them to destroy him. I asked them to talk about what it meant that a man with power could refuse to save his children and walk away without consequence. Then I closed the laptop and went back to my children's room. The story didn't explode immediately. It glowed, then it burned. The ethics writer published first, a calm, detailed piece, "When a father refuses, the ethics of declining to save your own children." No sensational language, just facts. Then the local station picked it up, then a national outlet, then social media. Within 24 hours, Walter's name was everywhere. Billionaire CEO refuses to donate bone marrow to his dying twins. I can't risk my schedule. Father declines life-saving procedure for children. What should we do when a parent with the power to save a life chooses not to? His glossy press photos were suddenly side by side with pictures of Helen and David in hospital gowns, smiling weakly at the camera with IV poles beside them. Save Helen and David started trending. People were angry, mothers, grandmothers. People who donated marrow to strangers or signed up for the registry. People who had nothing in common except one belief: you do not walk away from your children. MedTech Innovations stock dropped. Sponsors released statements about monitoring the situation. The board scheduled an emergency meeting, and for the first time since I'd known him, Walter Scott was on the defensive. He arrived at the hospital 2 days later. No entourage this time, just him. His suit was still expensive, but it looked looser somehow. There were shadows under his eyes that hadn't been there before. He didn't knock. He cornered me in the hallway. "You did this," he said, voice low and tight. "You exposed our private medical situation. You weaponized the media. You're manipulating public opinion." "I told the truth," I said. "You ruined my reputation," he snapped. "The board is questioning my leadership. Sponsors are pulling out of deals. We've lost almost 20% in market value in 3 days." "No," I said calmly. "You did that when you refused to save your children. I just refused to cover for you." His hand went through his hair, something like panic in his eyes. "Do you have any idea how many jobs are tied to my company? How many people depend on that stability? You've made this messy, emotional, irrational." "Irrational," I repeated, my voice dropping. "You looked at your dying son and daughter, and said you needed time to protect your image. You called your children's lives risk to your schedule. There's nothing irrational about people reacting to that exactly the way they should. You think you're some kind of hero, he said, bitterness sharpening his words. You're using sick children to... Finish that sentence, I said. Say it. Say I'm using our dying children because I expected their father to care if they lived. His mouth snapped shut. This isn't over, he said finally. You're right, I said. It's not over. Not until you make the one decision you should have made the second you saw them. He stared at me, then stormed off down the hallway. But I noticed something. He didn't go to the exit. He went toward the ICU. Dr. Morrison found me that night. I knew it was bad before he spoke. Doctors have a face they use for news that changes everything. He was wearing it. It's David, he said. My heart stopped. He collapsed 30 minutes ago, Dr. Morrison continued. Respiratory failure. We intubated. His blood pressure is unstable. His organs are starting to show signs of stress. I ran. When I turned the corner into David's room, the sound hit first. Machines alarming. Nurses calling out numbers. The mechanical whoosh of the ventilator, forcing air into lungs that had stopped doing their job. David's small body looked swallowed by equipment, tubes, wires, lines. Helen was in the doorway, crying, a nurse holding her shoulders. Walter stood against the far wall, white as a sheet. He looked from the monitor to David's face and back again, as if trying to find the part of this he could negotiate with. There's no more time, Dr. Morrison said, looking between us. If we're going to attempt transplant, it has to be now. We can fast-track processing. It's risky, but we've done it in critical cases like this. Without it, he didn't finish. He didn't have to. He handed me a clipboard. Emergency consent for high-risk procedures, he said. You have to sign if you want us to proceed. My hands shook as I signed my name. Again. On lines that blurred through tears, I looked at Walter. If he dies, I said quietly, you will live the rest of your life knowing it was because you chose yourself. He swallowed hard. I'll do it, he whispered. The donation. Now. Whatever it takes. You're 4 days too late, I said. But if there's even a 1% chance your cells can save them, we're taking it. He nodded. For the first time since I'd known him, he looked completely, utterly powerless. Welcome to my world, I thought. Subscribe, because Chapter 6 is the night everything comes apart, and the night a man who thought he had time discovers that he doesn't. The alarm started at 11:47 p.m. Not the gentle beeping I'd learned to sleep through, the urgent, piercing shriek that means something is catastrophically wrong. Get help now. I was on my feet before my brain caught up. David's monitors were screaming. Oxygen saturation plummeting. Heart rate climbing, then dropping, then spiking again. The numbers changing so fast they blurred into meaningless chaos. David! I grabbed his hand. Cold. Too cold. His lips were turning blue. Helen woke up screaming. Then the room flooded with people. Nurses crashed through the door. Dr. Morrison appeared with a crash cart. Hands pushed me back, gentle but firm. Voices shouting medical codes I didn't understand, but knew meant we're losing him. David, baby, stay with me, I begged. But they were already pulling me toward the wall. Dr. Morrison took one look at the monitors and his voice cut through everything. He's in acute respiratory distress. Bag him. Get me an intubation kit. Someone page anesthesia now. Crash cart. Intubation. The language of dying. Mom! Helen was sobbing, trying to get out of bed, her own monitors beeping warnings as her heart rate spiked. What's happening to David? A nurse, Ellis, gently but firmly kept her in bed. Sweetie, you need to stay calm. Let them work. But there was nothing calm about watching your brother's chest stop moving on its own. They were doing compressions, forcing air into lungs that had given up, injecting medications into his IV with the kind of controlled urgency that comes from years of practice and current desperation. Someone thrust a tablet at me. Emergency consent, a voice said. Maybe the administrator. Maybe someone else. I couldn't focus. Intubation, mechanical ventilation, possible resuscitation if he codes. My hands shook so hard I could barely hold the stylus. I signed my name over and over, giving strangers permission to cut into my child, to shock his heart if it stopped, to do whatever violence was necessary to keep him alive. If you've ever stood helpless while doctors fight for someone you love, if you've had to watch professionals do everything they can while knowing it might not be enough, you know that helplessness is its own form of death. They stabilized him. Barely. David was intubated now, a breathing tube taped to his face, forcing oxygen into lungs that couldn't do the work anymore. Sedated so deeply, he looked like a wax figure of my son instead of my actual child. Alive, but barely tethered to this world. He's in multi-organ failure, Dr. Morrison told me in the hallway. His voice was gentle but unflinching, the voice of someone who's delivered this news too many times. His kidneys are struggling. His liver enzymes are elevated. The leukemia is too aggressive. His body can't sustain this. How long? I whispered. Without transplant? Days, maybe less. We're keeping him alive with machines and medications. But that only buys us time, not a cure. Days, my 12-year-old son had days left. I leaned against the wall because my legs wouldn't hold me anymore. What about Helen? I managed. She's stable. For now. But David's collapse has accelerated her decline too. Stress hormones, fear. They're twins. There's a connection we don't fully understand medically, but we see it. When one suffers this acutely, the other's body responds. I closed my eyes. All my fighting, all my public exposure of Walter, all my attempts to force consequences, and David was dying anyway. There's someone here, Dr. Morrison said quietly. I looked up. Walter Scott stood at the end of the hallway. He looked destroyed, suit wrinkled like he'd slept in it, if he'd slept at all, hair disheveled, eyes red-rimmed. He didn't look like a billionaire CEO anymore. He looked like a man who'd just realized what he'd done. I heard about David, he said hoarsely, voice cracking. The nurse called my assistant. I came as soon as... He stopped, swallowed hard. Can I see him? Every instinct screamed at me to say no. To protect my son from the man who'd chosen a board meeting over his life, to spare David the presence of a father who didn't deserve the title. But David was unconscious, and maybe, just maybe, seeing what his choice had done would finally crack Walter's armor of self-interest. Follow me, I said. Walter stopped dead in the doorway of David's room. The breathing tube, the ventilator's mechanical rhythm, the IV line snaking into his small arms, the monitors tracking every struggling heartbeat, every artificially maintained breath. David's body dwarfed by equipment designed to keep him alive when his own biology couldn't. This was real, not a business decision, not a scheduling conflict, not theoretical risk. This was his son, dying because he'd said no. Walter made a sound, something between a gasp and a sob, and his hands shot out to grip the doorframe. Oh God, he whispered. Oh God, what have I done? He moved to David's bedside like a man approaching a cliff edge. Reached out like he wanted to touch him, but was afraid he'd somehow make it worse. I didn't... His voice cracked completely. I didn't think it would be like this. I thought I had time. I thought... You thought wrong, I said quietly from the doorway. Walter's head snapped toward me, tears streaming down his face now. No attempt to hide them. Melissa, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I was wrong about everything. Sorry doesn't restart his kidneys. I know. Just tell me what to do. Tell me how to fix this. You can't fix this, Walter. You can only do what you should have done 2 weeks ago. The transplant. I'll do it, right now, tonight, whatever you need. I looked at Dr. Morrison, who'd followed us in. Is there still time? I asked, and my voice sounded strange, too calm, like I'd used up all my panic and had nothing left but cold logistics. Dr. Morrison's face was carefully neutral. If we harvest Walter's bone marrow immediately, tonight, and David survives long enough to receive it, there's a chance. Small. His body is so compromised that the transplant itself is now a massive risk. The conditioning, the infusion, any of it could kill him in his current state. But without it, he didn't finish. He didn't need to. And Helen? I asked. She needs it too. Urgently. Her numbers are dropping faster since David's crash. 2 transplants, both high risk, both necessary, both dependent on a man who'd already proven he'd walk away once. I looked at Walter, at this broken man who'd finally realized what his choices cost. If you're angry right now, if you think he doesn't deserve redemption, doesn't deserve forgiveness, doesn't deserve anything but consequences, I understand. Leave a comment. Tell me, because what I'm about to do isn't about what he deserves. It's about what my children need. Do it, I said to Dr. Morrison. Schedule both transplants as soon as humanly possible. Walter stood up straighter. Thank you. Thank you. I won't let you down. I promise. Don't, I cut him off, my voice like ice. Don't make promises. Don't tell me what you'll do. Just show up. For once in your miserable, self-centered life, just show up and do the right thing. He nodded, face crumpling. I will, I swear. Your swearing means nothing to me, I said. Your cells saving my children. That's all that matters now. They prepped Walter for emergency bone marrow extraction at 1:30 a.m. I sat between 2 rooms, David unconscious and intubated on one side, Helen awake and terrified on the other. Is David going to be okay? Helen kept asking, her voice getting smaller each time. He's fighting, I told her, because it was the only truth that didn't break her. And soon he'll have help. We're getting him the transplant. From Walter? Yes. Is Walter our dad? She asked, and the question hung there like something too heavy to hold. Biologically, yes, I said. But being a father is more than biology. It's showing up. It's choosing your kids over everything else. Walter's learning that now, the hard way. Helen was quiet for a long moment. Then, I'm glad he's helping, even if he should have done it sooner. My 12-year-old daughter dying, showing more grace than the billionaire who'd abandoned her. Walter was taken to surgery at 1:47 a.m. The extraction would take 2 hours. Then processing, they'd fast-track it, Dr. Morrison said, something they only did when protocol had to bend to desperation. Then transplant. By dawn, we'd know. By dawn, we'd know if we'd acted fast enough. If David's body could handle the assault of both illness and cure. If my son would live to see 13. I sat in that hallway alone. Helen finally sleeping fitfully. David unconscious. Walter in surgery. And watched time move like it was wading through concrete. Every second an eternity. Every minute a prayer I wasn't sure anyone was hearing. At 3:52 a.m., Dr. Morrison found me. The extraction was successful, he said. We have viable cells, high count, good quality. We're processing now for immediate transplant. How's Walter? Recovering. He'll be sore for days, but he's stable. He keeps asking about David. I nodded but didn't respond. At 5:47 a.m., they wheeled David to the transplant suite. At 6:15 a.m., they began Helen's infusion. And I stood in that hallway watching dawn break through the hospital windows, watching the sky turn from black to gray to pale, fragile gold, wondering if my children would live to see another sunrise, or if Walter Scott's redemption had come too late. Subscribe, because Chapter 7 is where we learn if a father's cells can save the children he abandoned, and whether saving their lives erases what he did. The transplant suite doors closed at 6:15 a.m. Helen went first, awake enough to squeeze my hand before they wheeled her away. Then David, still unconscious, still fighting for every mechanically delivered breath. I wasn't allowed inside. Hospital policy, sterile environment, infection control. Just closed doors and faith in strangers and my children's lives measured in stem cells and statistics. Walter was 3 floors down in recovery. Dr. Morrison said the extraction had gone well. They'd harvested enough healthy bone marrow for both transplants. The processing lab had worked through the night, isolating and preparing the cells that might save Helen and David. But might is a cruel word when it's all you have. I sat in the family waiting area, alone. Carrie had texted, offering to come. I'd told her no. This was something I needed to do the way I'd done everything for 13 years. Alone, holding it together, refusing to fall apart until it was over. The hours crawled. I thought about everything that had led here. That Tuesday morning pregnancy test. Walter's face when I said twins. The empty apartment after he left. Helen's furious first cry. David's watchful silence. Every fever, every nightmare, every moment of being enough when I didn't feel like enough. The first time Helen drew a picture of our family, 3 stick figures, no fourth. The way David never asked, "Where's Dad?" like other kids did, because he'd learned early that some questions don't have good answers. Building a life from ruins, from abandonment and fear, and the kind of love that feels like both armor and wound. And now Walter Scott had shown up at the last possible moment, laid on a table for 2 hours, and suddenly he was being called a hero. The unfairness of it burned. If you've ever done the impossible alone and then watched someone else get credit for the final piece, you know this rage. It's not loud. It's cold. It's the understanding that sacrifice is rarely witnessed and never adequately repaid. Comment if you know what I mean, because I need to know I'm not the only one who feels this. Dr. Morrison found me at 11:37 a.m., 5 hours and 22 minutes after they'd taken my children into surgery. I stood up so fast the cold coffee I'd been gripping spilled across my hand. I didn't feel it. "They're both alive," he said. I collapsed back into the chair. Alive. "The transplants were successful," Dr. Morrison continued, sitting beside me. "We've infused Walter's stem cells into both Helen and David. No immediate rejection, no adverse reactions during the procedure. They're in recovery now, heavily sedated but stable." I couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. Couldn't do anything except sit there as 13 years of carrying everything finally cracked open. I cried, not quiet tears, not controlled grief. I sobbed, huge gasping sobs that came from somewhere deeper than lungs, deeper than bone. All the terror I'd been holding back. All the nights I'd stayed strong because my children needed me strong. All the times I'd whispered, "Please, please, please," to whatever might be listening. It poured out. Dr. Morrison put a hand on my shoulder and let me break. "Can I see them?" I finally managed. "Soon. Another hour. But Melissa..." He paused, and that pause pulled me back to reality. This is the beginning, not the end. The transplant itself succeeded. Now we wait to see if the cells engraft, if their bodies accept Walter's stem cells and start producing healthy blood. That takes weeks. There can be complications. Graft versus host disease, infection, rejection. We won't know for certain they're going to survive this for some time. Weeks. But weeks was better than days. Weeks was better than watching David's organs fail while I stood helpless. Weeks was hope wrapped in uncertainty, but it was still hope. "I understand," I said. Helen woke up first, groggy, disoriented, her hand immediately reaching across the space where David's bed usually was. "He's okay," I said quickly, gripping her hand. "You're both okay. The transplants happened. You're going to be okay." "Did Dad do it?" The word slipped out before she could catch it. "Dad. Not Walter. Dad." My heart cracked. "Yes," I said quietly. "Walter donated the bone marrow. You both have his cells now." Helen's eyes filled with tears. "Does that mean he wants us now?" God, that question. How do you explain to a 12-year-old that someone can save your life and still not earn the title they're genetically assigned? That sacrifice doesn't automatically equal love? "I don't know what it means, baby," I said honestly. "But it doesn't matter what he wants. You have me. You've always had me. That hasn't changed." "I know, Mom," Helen whispered, squeezing my hand weakly. "I know." David woke 2 hours later. They'd extubated him, removed the breathing tube, and he was breathing on his own. Weak, raspy, but breathing. His first words. "Did it work?" "Yes," I said, stroking his cheek. "It worked. You're going to be okay." He closed his eyes. A single tear ran down his temple. "I thought I was dying," he said quietly. "I know, baby, but you didn't. You're here. You're still here." David looked toward the door. "Is Walter here?" I hesitated. "He's recovering from the procedure. Do you want to see him?" David was quiet for a long time, his breathing the only sound besides the monitors. Then, "I don't know." And that honest, confused answer broke my heart more than anything else, because my children didn't know how to feel about the father who'd saved them after abandoning them. Didn't know if gratitude erased rejection, If biology created obligation, if cells and love were the same currency. They were 12. They shouldn't have to navigate this. But Walter had made sure they did. Walter appeared in the doorway that evening. Moving slowly, one hand pressed to his hip where they'd extracted the marrow. He looked exhausted, pale, humbled in a way I'd never seen. "Can I come in?" he asked softly. I looked at Helen and David. "It's up to them." Helen nodded slowly. David said nothing, but he didn't say no. Walter entered carefully, like he was approaching something fragile. He stood at the foot of their beds, hands at his sides. No lawyers or assistants to hide behind. "I'm glad you're both okay," he said, voice rough. "I'm glad the transplants worked." Silence. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness," Walter continued. "I know I made terrible choices. I was selfish, cruel. I abandoned you when you needed me, when you've always needed me." His voice broke. "I don't expect you to call me Dad. I don't expect you to love me or even like me. I just want you to know I'm sorry, and I'm going to do better. I'm going to be better." Helen looked at me, then at Walter. "Thank you for saving us." 3 words, more grace than he'd earned. David just watched him with those careful, analytical eyes. Said nothing. Walter nodded, tears on his face. "I'll leave you to rest, but I'll be here, however long it takes, whatever you need." He left. The room settled into quiet. "Mom," Helen said after a moment, "do we have to love him now? Because he saved us?" I smoothed her hair gently, looked at both my children, alive, breathing, given a second chance. "No, sweetheart," I said. "You don't have to love him. You don't owe him anything. Saving your life doesn't erase abandoning it. Showing up at the last second doesn't make up for 13 years of silence. He gave you his bone marrow, but I gave you everything else." David's hand found mine. "We know, Mom." And they did. The transplant saved their bodies, but I had saved their souls. Subscribe. Because Chapter 8 is where Walter tries to become the father he never was, and we discover whether some things can be forgiven or only survived. Recovery was slow. The medical kind progressed better than anyone dared hope. Helen and David's white blood cell counts climbed steadily. The cancer markers dropped. Color returned to their faces like spring arriving after a brutal winter. But the other kind of recovery, the emotional kind, the kind that happens when you try to reconcile who someone was with who they claim they're becoming, that moved at a glacial, painful pace. Walter came every day, not at first. The first week after transplant, he stayed away. Hospital orders, let the immune system stabilize, minimize infection risk. He sent flowers Helen liked and David politely acknowledged. He sent messages through nurses asking how they were, if they needed anything, if he could visit. I said no for 6 days, because my children needed to heal without the weight of his guilt pressing down on them. But on day 7, Helen asked, "Is Walter coming back?" "Not will he. Is he?" "Do you want him to?" I asked carefully. She thought about it, her thin fingers playing with the edge of her blanket. "Maybe. He saved us. Shouldn't we at least talk to him?" David, reading in the chair beside her bed, said nothing, but his jaw tightened in that way that meant he was listening to everything. "I'll tell him he can visit," I said, "but only when you're both ready, and only if you want him here." Helen nodded. David turned a page with more force than necessary. Walter's first visit was painful to watch. He arrived with books, medical thrillers for David, a fantasy novel for Helen, gifts chosen by someone who didn't know his children but was desperately trying to learn. "I wasn't sure what you liked," he said, standing awkwardly at the foot of their beds like he was afraid to come closer. "The bookstore owner said these were popular with kids your age." Kids your age, like they were demographic data instead of his children. Helen took the book with a small smile. "Thank you. This one's been on my list." David glanced at his copy, then went back to what he was reading. The silence stretched uncomfortably. Walter tried again. "The doctors say you're both doing really well. The engraftment is progressing ahead of schedule." "Yeah," Helen said. More silence. This man negotiated billion-dollar deals, commanded boardrooms, built an empire from nothing, but he had no idea how to talk to his own 12-year-olds. Walter cleared his throat. "I'm staying in the city indefinitely. taking a leave from the company, so I can be here. If you need anything or want to talk. David finally looked up. Why now? Walter blinked. What? Why now? David repeated, his voice flat and calm and devastating. Why are you staying now? Where were you for the last 12 years? Before we got sick? Before people were watching? Where were you then? Helen reached for David's hand. David. No, David said, eyes locked on Walter. I want to know. You had 12 years to care, 12 years to show up, 12 years to be a father, but you didn't. So why now? Is it because your stock dropped? Because people know what you did? Or do you actually care? The room went silent. Walter's face crumpled. You're right, he said quietly. You're absolutely right, and I don't have a good answer. I was scared. I convinced myself you'd be better off without me, that your mom was enough, that I'd just mess everything up. He paused. I was wrong. About all of it. I was a coward. You almost let us die, David said. I know. You chose a board meeting. I know. And now you want us to forgive you? Act like a family? Walter shook his head. No, I don't expect forgiveness. I just want the chance to try. To be here. Even if you hate me. Even if you never want me in your life. I want to try. David stared at him for what felt like forever. Then he went back to his book. The book recommendation was good, David said quietly. She knew what she was talking about. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was acknowledgement. And for now, that was something. If you've ever watched someone try to earn back trust they destroyed, if you've seen the slow, painful work of rebuilding what should never have been broken, you know it doesn't happen in grand gestures. It happens in tiny moments like this. Comment if you've been on either side of that journey. I set boundaries. Walter followed them without question. Visits limited to 1 hour, only when both kids agreed. No expensive gifts that felt like buying affection. No promises about the future he couldn't guarantee. No pressure to call him anything but Walter. And most importantly, no rewriting history. You don't get to pretend the last 13 years didn't happen, I told him one afternoon while Helen and David napped. You don't get to show up now and act like you were always going to be here. What should I tell them? Walter asked. The truth, that you were scared, that you made the wrong choice, that you hurt them and hurt me, and you're trying to do better. No excuses, no softening it, just truth. He nodded. 2 weeks into recovery, Walter sat down with Helen and David and told them everything. The pregnancy, his fear, walking away, the money, 13 years of silence. Helen cried quietly. David listened with that watchful expression that made him look older than 12. Do you wish we'd never been born? Helen asked, voice breaking. No, Walter said immediately, and there was no hesitation in it. You're the best thing I never knew I had. Missing your lives, not knowing you. That's my biggest regret. Bigger than anything else I've ever done or failed to do. Bigger than almost letting us die? David asked. Walter flinched but held his gaze. Yes, because I didn't just almost let you die once in a hospital. I let you live for 12 years without me. I missed every moment, every milestone, every chance to be your father. That's worse. It was the most honest thing he'd ever said. And slowly, painfully, tentatively, something began to shift. Walter didn't make grand gestures. He just showed up, every day, 1 hour. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes they sat in comfortable silence. Sometimes Helen told him about books or the dance classes she wanted to take when she was stronger. Sometimes David explained scientific concepts he'd been reading about, testing whether Walter actually cared or was just performing. Walter listened. Really listened. He learned Helen liked her toast slightly burned, that David hated bananas, that Helen was terrified of needles but never admitted it, that David had nightmares about the night he stopped breathing. He learned their favorite colors, their inside jokes with me, the small details that make up a life. He learned how to be present without demanding anything in return. One afternoon, 6 weeks post-transplant, David was reading aloud to Helen, something they did when she was too tired to hold a book herself. Walter walked in quietly. David paused, about to close it. Don't stop, Walter said. I'd like to hear how it ends. David hesitated, then continued reading. Helen fell asleep halfway through the chapter, her breathing deep and even and healthy. When David finished, he closed the book carefully. "You're trying," he said to Walter. "I see that you're trying." "I am," Walter said, "and I'll probably mess up, but I'm trying." David nodded once. "Okay. Not I love you, not I forgive you. Just okay." And somehow that was enough. I watched from the doorway as Walter sat with our children. Helen sleeping peacefully, David sketching in a notebook, the silence between them no longer awkward, but simply quiet. This wasn't the ending I'd imagined 13 years ago. I'd imagined Walter as the villain of our story, the man who abandoned us and never looked back. Or I'd imagined some fairy tale where he returned and fixed everything with money and apologies. But redemption doesn't work that way. It's not one moment. It's 1,000 small choices. It's showing up when it's hard, being present when it would be easier to leave, earning trust one painful, imperfect day at a time. Walter destroyed us once, but maybe, just maybe, he was learning how to build something new. Not the family we should have been, but the family we were becoming. I didn't forgive him, not fully. Maybe I never would, but I could see him trying. And for my children's sake, I had to let that be enough. Subscribe if you've stayed with us through all of this, because Chapter 9 is where this story finds its ending, and it's not the one anyone expected. 3 months after transplant, Helen laughed so hard she snorted. We were in the park, the first time they'd been outside the hospital in what felt like a lifetime. Real sunshine warming our faces, real grass beneath our feet, real air that didn't smell like antiseptic and fear. David had just told the world's worst joke, something about a periodic table that only a 12-year-old science nerd would find hilarious, and Helen doubled over, genuine laughter bursting out of her. They were alive, actually genuinely, miraculously alive. I sat on the bench watching them chase each other around the playground equipment they were technically too old for, but neither cared. Helen's hair was growing back in soft waves. David had gained back 10 pounds. They looked like children again instead of patients. I tried to remember what that bone-deep terror felt like, that specific fear of watching your children die. The memory was there, but it had lost its teeth. Maybe that's how brains protect us from trauma. They file it away somewhere we can access, but can't be destroyed by anymore. "They look good," Walter said, sitting beside me after asking permission with his eyes. He did that now, asked before assuming he belonged. "They do," I agreed. He'd been showing up for 3 months, not every day anymore. Helen and David had returned to school, had lives that didn't revolve around hospitals and treatments. But Walter came to David's science fair, where his volcano project won second place. He sat through Helen's first dance recital since getting sick, watching her stumble through moves she was still rebuilding strength for, and clapped like she just performed on Broadway. He was learning what it meant to be a father. "I've been thinking about next steps," Walter said carefully. "For us, for them, for whatever this is." "What about it?" "I'd like to be more involved. Officially. Not just the guy who visits sometimes, but their father. If," he paused, "if that's something you'd allow." "Allow, like I controlled his relationship with them." "That's not my decision to make," I said. "It's theirs. Ask them." Walter nodded slowly. "Right. Of course." We sat watching Helen and David play, 2 children who'd been given a second chance, who'd learned too young that blood doesn't automatically create family, that DNA and love are different things entirely. If you've made it this far, if you've stayed through betrayal and heartbreak and the slow, imperfect work of rebuilding, I want you to do something. Share this video, because what I'm about to say is the truth nobody talks about. Forgiveness isn't a single moment. It's a choice you make over and over, and sometimes you make it for someone else's sake, not your own. That evening, we had dinner together, not at a restaurant. At our apartment, the small, familiar space Walter had never seen because he'd never been part of this life. He looked around at the mismatched furniture from yard sales, the photos covering every wall documenting 13 years he'd missed, the life we'd built without him. "You did all this alone," he said quietly. "Yes," I should have been here. Yes, you should have. Helen was setting the table, her job, the one she took seriously. David was pretending to read but listening to everything. Can I ask you something? Walter said. Why did you let me back in? After everything, after abandonment, after refusal. Why give me this chance? I thought about it carefully. Because they deserve the chance to know you, I said finally. Not who you were, but who you're trying to become. I can't give them a father. Only you can do that. And despite everything, despite how much I hate what you did, I have to let them decide if you're worth knowing. And you, Walter asked, will you ever forgive me? I looked at him. This man who destroyed me once and saved my children later, who'd been the villain and the hero, often in the same breath. I don't know, I said honestly. Maybe someday, maybe not. But forgiveness isn't about whether you deserve it. It's about me choosing not to carry the weight of hating you anymore. That's different than forgiving. Helen interrupted, calling from the kitchen. Dinner's ready. We sat down together, all four of us. The family that should have existed 13 years ago but was only now, tentatively, beginning to form. David said grace, something he'd started in the hospital and continued at home. Thank you for this food. Thank you for second chances. Thank you for everyone at this table. Everyone at this table, including Walter. It was the first time David had included him without hesitation. After dinner, Walter helped with dishes while Helen and David argued over which movie to watch. A normal sibling argument that sounded like music after months of hospital silence. They're defining family on their terms, I said, handing Walter a plate. Not based on blood, not based on obligation, based on choice. And they're choosing me? Walter asked, something fragile in his voice. Slowly, with boundaries, on their terms. I can work with that. Can you? I asked, turning to face him. Because this isn't a business deal, Walter. You can't negotiate your way into their hearts. You can't buy their love with gifts or grand gestures. You can only show up. Consistently, even when it's hard. Even when they push back. Even when you fail. And you will fail, you keep trying. I know, he said quietly. I'm learning. Helen appeared in the doorway. Walter, do you want to watch the movie with us? Not do you have to. Not mom says you should. Do you want to? An invitation. A choice freely made. Walter looked at me. I nodded. I'd like that very much, he said. And just like that, something shifted again. Not fixed, not healed completely, but moving in the right direction. Because redemption isn't a destination. It's a direction you choose every day. And Walter was finally moving the right way. 6 months after transplant, we got the news we'd been holding our breath for. Complete remission, both of them. The cancer was gone. Helen and David were going to live. We celebrated at home with cupcakes from Rosa's bakery, the same one we'd been going to since they were 3. Nothing fancy, nothing elaborate, just us. And Walter standing in the doorway with flowers for Helen and a first edition science book he'd hunted down for David. Come in, I said. You're part of this now. He was. Not the way he would have been if he'd shown up 13 years ago. Not as the father who'd been there from the beginning, but as the man who'd learned, painfully, expensively, almost too late, that some things matter more than empires. Helen hugged him first. Quick, still tentative, but real. David shook his hand, then after a pause, hugged him too. Thank you, David said quietly, for saving us. Thank you for letting me try, Walter replied, voice thick. Later, after Walter left and the kids were in bed, I sat alone in the dark living room, thinking about power, about what it means to have it, about how it can be used to destroy or save, often by the same person. Walter Scott had built an empire, commanded billions, changed industries, but he'd almost lost the only things that actually mattered. I'd built nothing by his standards, had no wealth, no power, no empire, but I'd loved 2 children fiercely enough to keep them alive against impossible odds. I'd fought when fighting seemed futile. I'd refused to accept that money and status could outweigh a mother's will. A billionaire saved their lives with his cells, but a mother saved their souls with her love. And in the end, that's the difference between blood and family. Blood is biology, DNA, a match determined by science and chance. But family is choice. It's showing up. It's loving someone even when it's hard, even when they disappoint you, even when forgiveness feels impossible. Helen and David were alive because of bone marrow, but they were whole because of love. If this story moved you, if you stayed until the end, I need you to do 3 things. First, subscribe to this channel. Because stories like this, about mothers who refuse to quit, about second chances that come with conditions, about children who survive what should have destroyed them, these stories need to be told. Second, share this video. Someone in your life needs to hear that fighting alone doesn't mean fighting wrong, that doing everything by yourself still counts, that grace and boundaries can exist in the same breath. Third, leave a comment. Tell me your story about the person who showed up when it mattered, or the time you showed up for someone else, about second chances and the messy work of forgiveness, about what family means when blood isn't enough. Because that's what we do. We tell our stories. We witness each other's pain and survival. And we remind each other that we're not alone. Helen and David are 13 now, healthy, strong, alive. They still have complicated feelings about Walter. Some days they call him Dad. Some days they don't. They're learning that relationships aren't binary, that you can love someone and still hold them accountable, that gratitude doesn't erase hurt, that family is built day by day, choice by choice, and every morning they wake up breathing as a reminder. Love isn't just what saves us. It's what makes us worth saving.